Hello, welcome back to Journeys in Sound, Episode 5. Today, I'll be talking about the album Hospice by the Antlers. The album has a solid 51 minutes and 47 seconds of runtime. Released on the 23rd of March 2009, this project contained 3 singles, Bear, 2, and Sylvia. Set in New York City's Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, which the second track, Kettering, is named after, Hospice tells the story of a relationship between a hospice worker and a female patient suffering from terminal bone cancer, their ensuing romance, and their slow downward spiral as a result of the woman's traumas, fears, and disease. The story of her deterioration also serves as a metaphor for an abusive relationship. Frontman of the Antlers, Peter Silberman, has been reluctant to divulge explicit details regarding the meaning of the record and the extent to which it is autobiographical. He allows the listener to come to their own conclusion and interpretations, making this very specific situation much more relatable or understandable to many listeners. The record is a 10-track emotional rollercoaster. It's an experience that needs to be listened to in its entirety for the effect Silberman intended when he created the album. I'm going to go track by track to analyze the music, message, and effect. Prologue. The first track, Prologue, starts with the album with a slow, desolate instrumental, really showing the listener what they're in for when they put on the record. The song's broad soundscapes and overlapping sounds are intermixed by light strokes of keyboard. Given the name of the song, it is clearly an introduction to the album, and the sounds really represent the emotions the album will give you, or perhaps what Silverman felt while making the record. A vast, harrowing emptiness. Kettering, the second track on the record, and definitely the most well-known on the album, being featured in 11 different movies and TV shows. Kettering introduces the listener to the relationship between our protagonist and the patient. The song starts the extended metaphor of an abusive relationship. The name Kettering refers to Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. This aspect introduces the geographical setting of the album and the main subject of sickness. It starts off slow, where Prologue leaves off. This creates a cohesiveness and continuity between the whole record. Silberman's vocals in this track are a mixture of singing and whispering, describing the situation of the patient. And quote, "Walking in that room when you had tubes in your arms, though singing morphine alarms out of tune." This gives the reader an idea of just how serious the situation of the patient is. Despite the whispering, Silberman still manages to create a deep and impactful range of emotions with the passion he sings with. It feels surreal and raw, like he's just come out of the hospice himself and recorded this track. The second half of the song is an instrumental with background vocals, giving a sense of chaos, possibly representing the inner thoughts of our protagonist, a whirlwind of emotions. Perhaps the most famous quote from the entire album appears in the song. "I didn't believe them when they called you a hurricane thunderclap." The nurse we follow won't give up on the patient, and despite the situation, will struggle to keep her alive. This is a feeling we see echo through the entirety of the album. Despite the horrible situation, the human fear of death and natural instinct to survive will be a feeling that resonates on this track and others later in the album. The track ends with a fade to black, perhaps foreshadowing the end of the album. Sylvia, the third track on the album, is very different from the previous tracks, being much louder and vocal. The title refers to both Leonard Michael's book, which has the character of Sylvia, a woman who commits suicide, which Silberman said directly influenced him to create the album. It also refers to American author and poet Sylvia Plath, who committed suicide by putting her head in an oven. This is directly referenced in the lines, "Sylvia, get your head out of the oven." The track shows the emotional state of the patient, as our protagonist says, "Go back to screaming and cursing," showing the hospice worker would rather have Sylvia screaming and cursing at him than her be quiet and giving up on herself, like we hear later in the song. This is what makes this record so great. Things that happen before impact and enrich the listening experience later on. The entire story of this album has been meticulously planned out and just goes to show the talent of the Antlers. Paired with the hard-hitting, raw lyrics and vocals, it's no surprise why this album is so beloved by those who listen. The end of this track starts a very important aspect of the story. The romantic relationship between Sylvia and the Eye. This can be seen in such quotes as, "I hate my voice because it only makes you angry," which shows that the reader is becoming more and more invested in the happiness of Sylvia, something that a nurse should be. But he takes this further by saying, "I only talk when you are sleeping. That's when I tell you everything," which shows the nurse may be more invested in Sylvia than he should be as a nurse. Atrophy, the fourth track on Hospice, is a raw, serious track full of metaphors and deep lyrics. The title itself means a reduction in the functionality of an organ caused by disease, injury, or lack of use, showing us the state of Sylvia and how severe the cancer is. There is a return of the whispering from the second track, Kettering, which really sets the tone of this track. It centers around the control that Sylvia has over the Eye. The first line of the song, "You've been living a while in the front of my skull making orders," shows this, as the front of the control is the command center of the brain and is what tells your body what to do. This metaphor shows us that Sylvia has near complete control over our protagonist. He even later sings, "You've been writing me rules, shrinking maps, and redrawing borders." This shows the emotional and even physical manipulation that Sylvia has on the Eye by setting guidelines and rules on their relationship and his own personal life. How far that relationship deviates from solely nurse and patient to something more is unknown so far. This is the metaphor of the words, but they can be taken quite literally, as Sylvia telling him where to sleep and deciding when he eats, which is seen in later lyrics like, "I've been living in bed because now you tell me to sleep." The nature of the relationship between the two is further expanded on later in the song, where it's clear the pair see each other in a romantic way, even if it's a one-sided, abusive relationship. This is the main theme of the album, abusive relationships, and what power is, and what it is to those who hold it. In this second verse of the song, the relationship becomes violent, with Sylvia throwing little porcelain figurines at him and giving him threats of castration, showing the abusiveness of Sylvia. The listener learns a bit about our protagonist when he says, "With the bite of the teeth of that ring on my finger, and bound to your bedside, your eulogy singer." This shows they are married now and that he feels trapped in a relationship. Though it's clear he loves her and is stuck in a very difficult situation, she still treats him terribly and him expects to die, with the metaphor of eulogy singer. The end of the song is what gives us the most insight into the characters, with it being noticeably quieter than the start of the song. It sounds more of a plea for help than a song, with such lines as, "Someone, oh anyone, tell me how to stop this." However, more radical views say this is him secretly admitting she can't be saved, but he can't leave her, especially when he describes Sylvia as expiring. It is also of note that the Eye describes himself as infected, perhaps showing what he thinks of the influence Sylvia has on him. Bear. The fifth track, titled Bear, is a metaphor for pregnancy. It becomes clear to the reader that the Eye has impregnated Sylvia despite her terminal cancer. The introductory melody is a variation of Mozart theme, which is present in many children's songs like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and Bar Bar Black Sheep. This introduces the theme of childhood and pregnancy. However, Sylvia has to get an abortion. This can also be seen as a tumour, given the cancer spread to her whole body. However, I believe it is more definitely about an abortion, with the lines, "A cub's been kicking you for weeks," and Sylvia does get an abortion, but the hospice worker wants to keep the child. However, he has such a need to please his patient that he's willing to abort his child, leaving the reader with questions about the morality of this relationship. 13. 13 is the only song on Hospice with a female co-lead vocalist. She sings from the perspective of Sylvia and asks for help from the abuse and doesn't want the doctors. The second verse, Silberman returns to the singing, perhaps signifying that, by trying to help his patient, and now wife, he's putting himself in a worse position, like a rescuer trying to save someone drowning, but drowning along with them. Silberman also references Sylvia Plath in this song, with the "Dig Me Out from Under Our House" sign. Sylvia Plath attempted suicide by taking sleeping pills under her mother's house. This entire story parallels Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes' relationship in many different ways, with Sylvia being a direct reference to Plath with the attempted suicides, and being a reference to Ted, how he stole all the spotlight from Plath, just like Sylvia did as a patient from the nurse, to the point where his whole life revolves around her. I think this is a good time to mention that while this is a very specific scenario, it's not uncommon for care workers to feel like they can't speak out. In fact, care worker suicide rates are very high due to them not getting the emotional attention that everyone needs, and often feel like they can't say anything due to the patient being in a worse condition than them. Therefore, they often don't or can't seek the help that they need. 2. 2 is a song about the self-destructive and private world that characters have created, and the problems it causes. They lock themselves away from society and family, only trusting one another until their relationships begins to fail. From the second verse onwards, it can be interpreted as being spoken from either of them, the nurse or the patient, even in the line talking about throwing objects at each other. The narrator here may just be Sylvia or the nurse that has previously been the narrator. The nurse may be outraged at Sylvia for doing this to him, but Sylvia deems it as his mistake. The double narration is hinted in the title of the song. 2. It can also be seen as the nurse, as if through placebo and being around Sylvia too much, begins to parallel how she feels and her emotions, her anger, and how everything builds up in him, a theme explored much more in the next songs. The song also shows how Sylvia got this bad emotionally. Not just her cancer, although that was part of it, the line, "They thought you were lying," which showed she could have been cured from this. However, her parents thought that she was lying or just complaining and didn't take her to the doctors to receive the help she needed. But also the quotation, "Daddy was an asshole," shows us that her father was an abusive and bad parent, perhaps where she gets her violent streak from. Shiva. Shiva describes the moment when Sylvia passes away, and the feeling that the nurse has at her death. Shiva is also a Jewish tradition where the immediate family mourns a death for 7 days, keeping in the theme of Sylvia's death. This song strongly reiterates the idea of the nurses becoming more and more like Sylvia, in the quote, "my face becoming yours," showing that at the moment he is free from the relationship and the woman that held him down and destroyed his life for so long, he immediately has become like her. In the quote, "my feet in the air, completely unable to move, the bed was misshapen and awkward and tall, clearly intended for you," shows that now she has died and left, he has taken her place, quite literally taking her bed in the hospital. Wake. A wake is the name of the social interaction that occurs around a funeral. Thus the title of the song, "Wake," shows how the nurse is acting socially. Wake continues with the overarching storyline of Hospice, using the tale of a hospice worker falling in love with a terminally ill patient as a metaphor of being trapped in an abusive relationship. In the previous track in the album, Shiva, the patient died, or in the metaphor, the relationship broke up. So, for Wake, the perspective changes to that of a friend who sees the nurse is suffering, wants to help. As Peter said in an interview to the Thefader, the first half of that song, Wake, is the narrator speaking to his friend, kind of atoning, apologizing. The second half, the "don't be scared to speak" part, is the narrator talking to himself and talking to anyone. The song is as close as the album comes to optimism and a positive note, despite still being very depressing at times. End quote. And I quote from the song, "I hope that she won't come home." The protagonist doesn't want his wife back. She ruined his life in this song. In this song, he is still a social introvert, staying in his room and not going out, too afraid to the people he once turned away during his marriage. Until the 8th verse, when he said, "If you're willing to forgive, I've got the keys. I'm letting people in," showing how after her passing, he is changing for the better. Epilogue. The change in the end of Wake is completely destroyed and buried in this song, with it being a perfect way to end the album. Quite literally, titled Epilogue, it gives us closure on the album and how the nurse's life is after the death. It starts off with nightmares in which his dead wife is still alive, really showing what he thinks about their relationship. The track talks about the fact that all Sylvia wanted was to die with them and, quote, "be buried there together." Also, on the abusive relationship metaphor, he wants to improve their relationship, but all she wants to do is continue and bring him down to her level. The chorus is particularly harrowing with the delivery. Silberman pours his heart and soul and all of his hurt into it, giving a raw, gut-wrenching performance. It is also said that the nurse is no longer a nurse, saying, "They had to let me go," and the line, "I think you buried me awake." I think this is an incredible description of how she left him emotionally. The passion with which Silberman delivers the vocals here feel very much like an epilogue. All the pent-up emotion and the protagonist has built up is finally let out, now she's gone, and process what had happened, and how ruined his life is now. He finally realizes his wife was the worst thing to ever happen to him. The end note of the album is depressing and raw, reflecting the emotions as the entire album as a whole. Hospice by the Antlers is not the kind of album you wake up to or put on at a karaoke bar. It will leave you questioning things in your own life, and it's just plain sad. The music isn't upbeat or happy, but it's gritty and a naked look into this emotion Silberman was feeling while he was making this record. While Silberman hasn't shared how much of the album is autobiographical, I find it very hard to believe this is solely a work of fiction, due to the compellingness of the story and how real the characters in it feel. On one final night, I heard a great comparison to the album to art. Other albums that have sad themes tend to sugarcoat the sadness and make it an easy listen. I heard this being compared to abstract or escapist art. However, this album is hyper-realistic. It doesn't beat around the bush, and it tells you exactly how it is. There is a saying that a picture paints 1,000 words. Well, this album conveys 1,000,000, and I could talk for another 10 hours and still not truly encompass the full effect and meaning that Silberman had when he made this. That's why I think this album is so great, and everyone should listen to it at least once. Thank you. That has been Journeys in Sound, Episode 5.